Welcome back. This is day 6 of evolution, and today we're going to be talking about how can we use anatomical evidence to support evolution. Now, when you see this word anatomical, you may recognize the word anatomy, right? And that word anatomy is just talking about structures, right? So we're talking about physical or body structures that make up organisms. How can we use that type of evidence to support evolution? Well, let's find out. Before we get to that, you guys have got a do now question. So, on Earth, we have uncovered many fossils of animals that are no longer alive. How does this provide evidence for evolution? Go ahead and pause this video, write down what you think, and press play when you're ready to review it. All right. So, on this image, you can see a caricature or a cartoon of what that fossil record looks like over time. So, at the very bottom, we're going to find the oldest structures, right? The oldest fossils. And then up here at the top, we find the newest structures or the newest fossils. And we can see, looking at that fossil record, how these species have changed and evolved over time. We can literally see that change happening as we examine the fossil record and see what structures are present in each of these organisms. So this gives us evolution or evidence for evolution because we can look at that fossil record and look at the phenotypic evidence, look at the molecular and genetic evidence, and literally see how these organisms have changed and evolved, or how the species have changed and evolved over time, right? Where certain species have gone extinct, new ones have arisen from that. All right, so this shows us that change happening kind of layer by layer. So as long as you said anything along those lines, you're good to go. Now, back to that word anatomical or structural evidence, right? When we're talking about anatomical evidence, there are a few things that we need to know, right? We can actually look at comparing body structures of organisms, right? We can actually look at that anatomical record, looking at the structures that organisms have. We can compare protein and DNA sequences between species and between organisms, and we can look at that molecular record. We can look at how species have changed over time, showing us that fossil record like we just saw on that last slide. And then we can also look at how evolution is happening around us, right? And how humans have caused evolution throughout the years through the use of artificial selection or selective breeding, right? We talked about how organisms have forced different dogs to breed and have literally caused evolution of those species, like the bulldog, and caused those changes to occur. So all of this is evidence pointing towards evolution, right? We've got the anatomical, molecular, and fossil records, as well as we can see the results of artificial selection or selective breeding. All of this is anatomical evidence that supports evolution. But now, when we see this word anatomical record, let's think about what this really means. So animals may have different structures on the surface, but when you actually look underneath the skin, a lot of us actually have similar anatomy that tells us that evolutionary story of common ancestors. So when we compare the bones, right, we can see that actually many animals and many organisms have the same bones underneath the skin. You can see that right here in this image right here. We've got humans, cats, whales, and bats. Oh my gosh, that rhymed. On the surface, these organisms look really different, but if we actually look at the bones underneath the surface, we've got the same bones, guys. We've got humerus, we've got the radius, we've got the ulna, the carpals, etc. And you can see that those are color-coded across the species. We have the same bones. So what does that mean? Well, that means that limbs that perform different functions are still built from the same bones. But again, how is this possible? How could these very different animals have the same bones? Well, think about what we've been talking about. Think about what this looks like on an evolutionary scale. This tells us that we evolved from a common ancestor. So all of these organisms at one point or another evolved from the same ancestor. That means we all have those same bones. We use our arms and our fins for different functions, but we've got the same ancestor. And we call these structures homologous structures. These are structures that come from the same origin. So again, that word homo means same. Logos means information. So we're talking about the same origin, same structures, really. Right? So again, we've got the forelimbs of humans, cats, whales, and bats. I love that that rhymes. It's the same structure on the inside, right? Which means they also have the same development in embryo. A few days ago, we looked at the comparative embryology, comparing the embryos of some developing organisms, and we saw that they actually look pretty similar, which means we came from a common ancestor. That is really when you can start to see these homologous structures start to evolve, right? We have the same development. Right, here's another slide showing us homologous structures. Today, when you bend down to pet your cat, you may start to think, but wait, like my arm doesn't do the same thing as this cat's arm. And you're right. But if you look underneath that surface, those bones are the same, which means somewhere along the way, we evolved from the same ancestor. So it's important to note that these homologous structures may not necessarily have the same function, but they do have the same ancestor, which means they've got the same origin. All right, here's another example of that. We can see humans, dogs, dolphins, and fruit bats. Again, different structures, or I'm sorry, different functions, but the same bones or the same structures underneath. All right. But now let's look at a different example. All right, so if you look at this picture, we've got dolphins, we've got penguins, we've got sharks. They all have some variation of a fin, right? Dolphins have got flippers, penguins have got penguins have got wings, and then sharks have got fins. They all look like pretty similar structures, but did these organisms necessarily evolve from the same ancestor, right? Dolphins are mammals, penguins are birds, and sharks are fish. Those are all really different organisms. So this is when we start to see this word analogous structures. So analogous structures look similar on the outside. They have the same function, but they actually have different structure and development on the inside. Right? We can see that these fins or these flippers look the same on the outside, but those bones on the inside are completely different. Right? They have a different structure and a different development, which tells us that they have a different origin. So these analogous structures actually don't have any evolutionary relationship. So dolphins are not related to penguins, penguins are not related to sharks. They don't share a common ancestor, but they have similar structures. So how did this come to be? Why do dolphins, aquatic mammals, and fish, or sharks, look so similar? Well, it's because they all faced similar problems and lived in similar environments, right? All of these organisms, in one way or another, live in the water. They faced the same problems, they were in the same environment. So over time, they adapted the same solution. These organisms faced the same problem and they lived in the same environment, so they developed, again, a similar solution. They all developed some variation of a flipper or a fin to help them swim through the water. And this is an example of convergent evolution. So you can see this picture right here. If lines are convergent, that means they come together. They once were separated, but they're coming together. So how can we apply this to evolution? What does this mean? Well, convergent evolution is when species independently evolve similar traits, right? We call these analogous structures, and they independently evolve those traits as a result of having to adapt to similar environments, right? So again, these organisms, if they share analogous structures, they do not share a common ancestor, right? They actually developed or evolved these traits independently of one another. But the reason they evolved those traits is because they faced similar problems. They came up with the same solution to the same problem that they were all facing. So then I want to ask you guys, why would whales have pelvis and leg bones if they were always sea creatures? Whales swim, right? I don't think they're using their pelvis or leg bones. So why do they have them? Well, it's because whales evolved from a common land mammal ancestor. So somewhere along the line, one of their ancestors had legs, but then that whale decided to venture into the ocean. And now we're actually going to watch a video about that. So I do want you guys to pause me, and the link or on your worksheet, as well as on the, what is the word I'm trying to find? In the description for this video, I've also included the link for a video on whale evolution I want you guys to watch right now. I will warn you, it's a little bit dated, but it has some really good information. So I want you to pause me, go and watch this video about whale evolution, and based on this video, identify at least 3 pieces of evidence that suggest the evolution of whales from land mammals. It's a really interesting video, so let me know what you find out. All right, welcome back. If you are still here, I'm going to assume that you've watched that whale video. So from that video, you should have told me that we've got anatomical evidence, the fossil record, and geological evidence that all suggests that whales evolved from land mammals, right? We see that they have those leg bones that they don't use, or the remnants of leg bones, I should say. We've got fossils that shows us the ancestor that they likely evolved from. And then we've also got geological evidence, right? We saw that we were looking in Egypt for those fossils in what used to be an ocean, right? So all of this evidence is pointing towards the idea or the theory that whales evolved from mammals that once walked on land, which is really, really cool. Of course, this happened over millions of years, which is why they look so different. But evolution is wild, y'all. Some crazy things happen, and it's really, really cool to see. The last thing we're gonna do today is 2 practice questions. So these are on your worksheet. Go ahead and pause this video, answer these, and come back to check your answers. So number 1, 10 breeding pairs of rabbits are introduced onto an island with no natural predators, which means no one's gonna hunt them, and a good supply of water and food. So they're not going hungry, they're not going thirsty. What's going to happen to this rabbit population? Well, over time, this rabbit population is going to increase until it exceeds carrying capacity, right? If these rabbits don't have any predators and have enough food and water to survive, they're not struggling for survival, right? And we all know rabbits reproduce really fast. So that species, that population is going to skyrocket in terms of population. But then it's going to hit something called carrying capacity, which we'll actually talk about in our next unit. If you came to Saturday Academy, this probably looks pretty familiar. The carrying capacity is basically the max number of organisms an environment can support. Right, so those rabbits are going to increase until they run out of food and water, and they no longer have the environment no longer has the capacity to support them. All right, number 2, base your answer to the following question on the scatter plot graph below and on your knowledge of biology. The graph shows changes in the percentage of vancomycin-resistant bacteria in a population between the years 1983 and 2001. Explain why the percentage of resistant bacteria increased over time. So why are these bacteria resistant to this antibiotic? Yeah, I should have that. This is an antibiotic. Right. I will also note, this question is super, super important. You will likely see a question very similar to, if not identical to this question on your Regents. There's always a question about antibiotic resistance over time. So why did this resistant bacteria increase? Well, the percentage of resistant bacteria increased because those resistant bacteria survived and were able to reproduce. There was most likely a mutation amongst this population that made a few of these bacteria resistant to this antibiotic. That allowed those resistant bacteria to survive and reproduce, which means their offspring then inherited that resistant trait. This is actually natural selection being displayed in real time. All right, and that is all I've got for you guys today. So go ahead and complete your exit ticket. Submit these notes on Google Classroom and have a wonderful day. Let me know if you guys have any questions on Remind, but other than that, I will see you guys tomorrow.